Though one may be overpowered by another, two can withstand him, and a threefold cord is not quickly broken.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Strength to Strength once again. And it's a blessing to see you. Those of you who have decided to get up and join us with the live call here at 6 o'clock or 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock, depending on where you're located. Our vision here at Strength to Strength is to inspire flourishing communities of faithful Jesus followers around the world. It's wonderful to have you here with us this morning, but our live audience isn't that large, and we're okay with that. We can't replace the necessary personal relationships that are needed in the kingdom. And as wonderful as it is to have you join us on this platform on Saturday mornings for the live call, this isn't the purpose of Strength to Strength. Our hope is to encourage and hopefully instruct and to connect people so that they can experience Christ's body in a local community. Brother Bryant Martin will be sharing with us this morning. He is I was trying to think of how to frame this. I would say the brain behind Strength to Strength. There's a few of us that come along and listen and discuss some of these ideas and our dreams here with Strength to Strength with him. But I have to say he comes up with a lot of this, and he's very creative, and God has blessed him with an active mind, and he's not afraid to dream. So thank you, Brother Bryant, for all the work you do here at Strength to Strength. And thank you for this message that you're about to bring to us this morning. I can say personally, being on the receiving end, that hospitality is something very close to your heart. And you're going to talk about extending your table. And I would say that my wife and I have experienced that firsthand, that extension of table. Shortly after we had made a choice to follow Jesus Christ, we connected with Bryant and Linnell, his wife, and I think it was almost a year that we met every week on Zoom. And I think that's a very practical way that he has extended his table and for the growth of other believers. And we're very grateful for that. So I'm excited to hear this talk. I can't say I've heard it all before, but I've heard a lot of it before, and I'm excited to hear it again. So God bless you, brother, as you share this message that's close to your heart and something that you live out very practically in your everyday life. Before we get started, let's have a word of prayer. Eternal Father, we look to you with joy and gratitude, for you are loving and kind and gracious and merciful.
Yes.
Not one of us would be here without your call and without your provision. We thank you that we can trust our lives into your hands. I pray that you would bless this time together here this morning. Be with Brother Bryant as he shares a message that he is passionate about and that he cares deeply about. I thank you that he not only feels passionate about it, but he lives it out in his everyday life. I just pray that you would bless him as he shares, give him freedom, and be with each one of us, Lord, as we listen to this word. Father, help us to have hearts of compassion and empathy for the people around us, that we would open our homes and our hearts in ways that the world is astounded to see. Just pray that you would be with our time. May your Spirit be in the driver's seat in all of this. And we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Good morning, good day to all you that are here. I'm humbled to share this morning, and I cover your prayers as I share this message that God has placed on my heart. On a Saturday morning, about this time of the day, approximately 5.5 years ago, I found myself climbing a mountain in northern Iraq. I was trying to keep up with a 70-year-old brother, a widower who was there serving a displaced people group in that part of the world. And on Saturday mornings, he did this hike way back in the mountains, and I got to go with him that morning. And it took everything I could do to keep up with him. We get to the top of the first range, and we get to turn, and we look out across the plains of northern Iraq. And off in the distance, you can see the light of a city that was ancient Nineveh in its day. Today it's not called that. Just spectacular scenery. Early in the morning, we're looking west. The sun's just starting to come up. We turn and continue on our hike back into the mountains. And again, I'm doing all I can do to keep up with this brother. We get back in and we stop on this top of this range. And this brother says, look way out across there to that range on that corner of that mountain. That's where we're heading. And there he said there's this ancient village where that's no longer existing. It was bombed by a former dictator of this country. It was a village of dissenters. But at this ancient village is a artesian well that just comes out of the mountain. And that's where we're going to refill our water bottles, and we'll come back. And I look out across there, and I'm looking where he's pointing, and I see it on one of those ledges, these terraces where he's pointing. I see people moving, men moving. And I turn to him and say, brother, there's a bunch of men over there. And this older brother, he looks and he can't see them. And he says, occasionally there's shepherds, that come back through here with their goats, and it's probably just a sheep herder, a goat herder. And I said, I don't think so. It's a number of men. And at that moment, my mind goes back to something that one of the other men at this project told me the day before. He said, this older brother hikes back in the mountain every Saturday morning, way back in, and we always hope he comes back. There's back in the mountains, there's Iranian militias and other militias that operate and live and work from. And he said, it's not occasionally there's bombings back in there. Occasionally Turkey drops bombs. It's not the safest place in the world. And I'm remembering all of a sudden that conversation. And he went on to say, he said, but we always remember, he said, this older brother who hikes back in, he's got a big gray beard. And we always remember that, console ourselves with the fact that Middle Eastern culture respects elders. And so, you know what? If you would happen across some bad guys, most likely, there would be no harm done. But that was 5.5 years ago. And 5.5 years ago, I didn't have a lot of gray hair. And I'm thinking, I'm like a sitting duck here. And but by then, this old brother was headed down into this deep valley, and I either I was going to remain here in the mountain alone and give up, or go with him. And I chose the latter, to go with him, and down into that valley and up across the other side we went, up to this ancient little footpath that traveled around the mountain to where this village was. And we get on this path and we start coming on the mountain. And I know that we're getting close, and I'm following close behind him, and every fiber in my body is alive. I'm really focused now. What will I see as I come around the corner of the mountain? Who will these people be? And we come around the corner of the mountain, and there on this terrace right in front of us is a number of men seated on the ground. And they don't see us right away. There's a small fire there. Against this old ancient stone wall is a couple of guns propped over here. There's another little fire going where I can see they had their chai kettle there where they're making hot water for their chai. And I look back to this group of men, and at that point, there's one man getting up and he's coming towards us. And there's one thing about him that just brought so much relief in my spirit, in my heart, in my mind. And that is, he has a big smile on his face. And he has his hands out. He's saying, welcome, welcome. And he can speak our language. And so we walk up to these men, and all the other men are jumping up. They're not able to speak to us, but they have smiles on their face, and they're gesturing with their hands to sit down where they were seated there on this cloth. And on this cloth is goat cheese and roasted walnuts and dates and naan, which is the most amazing bread from the Middle East. And we get seated there, and these men become our servers, and we become their guests. And we sit there. One man's adding more water to the chai. We soon have chai, and we sat there on that side of that mountain, and we had the most epic picnic I've ever had. Incredible hospitality was shown to us. And just hold that story for a moment. We're going to get into my topic here. We'll come back to that story. Have you ever experienced a table in the wilderness? Have you ever created a table in the wilderness experience for someone else? For someone who you wouldn't have had to, but you did. This morning, my topic is titled Tables in the Wilderness. And we'll get to the table word later, but just for a couple minutes here, I want us to think about the word wilderness. What does that mean to you? A wilderness, by definition, is a wild, uninhabited, and uncultivated region. It's a desolate tract. It's a confused mass or collection. It's a place where only people with fortitude go. Those who are timid stay away. It's wild, it's lonely, it's inhospitable. It can be a tract of land, or it can be an idea or a concept. It can be a world that is set against Eden. It's set against the ways of God. It's set against the ways of heaven on earth. And we live in that kind of a world, friends. We live in that kind of a world. It's a world where there's wars. In the last 2 years, there's been numerous, very high-profile wars, very public wars that have went on. And there's many, many more wars that we aren't hearing about. It's in parts of the world where it's just not popular to talk about. Those are happening. The press isn't making those public. So wars and rumors of wars. There's broken families. There's rampant sexual brokenness. There's addictions. There's mental health crisis in our world. There's loneliness, an epidemic of loneliness. And I just want to stop there for a second and read out of this book here called The Six Conversations, Heather Holman. I'll be referring to this book later in this talk. And Heather says this, she says, nearly half of Americans report something or sometimes or always feeling alone. 47% of Americans say this. 1 in 4 Americans, 27%, rarely or never feel as though there are people who really understand them. 2 in 5 Americans sometimes or always feel that their relationships are not meaningful, 43%, and that they are isolated from others. 1 in 5 report that they rarely or never feel close to people. 20%. Or feel like there are people that they can talk to, 18%. Feel there's almost never anyone to talk to. Only around half of Americans, 53%, have daily meaningful in-person social actions, such as having an extended conversation with a friend or spending quality time with others. Generation Z, adults 18 to 22, is the loneliest generation and claims to be in worse health than older generations. And I'm going to have a story to tell you a little bit of a young man who I met yesterday, an interaction that I felt was divinely appointed, that I almost chose to walk away from. And he was 21 years old. There's people who say that, sociologists say that this loneliness that we're talking about it can be hard for those of us who have never experienced it, but it's almost worse than like not having water for 3 days or not eating, or starvation. Like it's palpable, it's tangible, it's a serious problem, this loneliness. And so we live in that world. But unfortunately, this is also in the church as well. Sometimes our churches feel like a wilderness. There's division, there's hypocrisy, there's isolation. It's just a Sunday morning shiny shoe show. There's a fixation on formulaic and individualistic save me gospel rather than being consumed or infatuated with a gospel that is good news, where there is a new king with a new nation, a new kingdom, where we are called as a corporate body to be part of a symphony that brings a piece of the home turf to foreign soil, heaven to earth. The latter is rarely experienced, and the former is just the condition of the church. And so you have a anemic body, anemic church, where many people are leaving and losing the faith, set against a world with so much brokenness, and where the world together, the powers of darkness, principalities and powers, spiritual hosts of wickedness in high places, seem to be aligning globally away from God. Just this week, the president of the United States gave the State of the Union address to this nation annually. That's what happens here in the U.S. And I listened to parts of that speech, and I listened to one other commentator talk about it for a couple minutes. And my conclusion is that speech, that the president of the United States, can be captured in one short phrase, and that is death and darkness. And globally, we see that happening. And so we live in a world where it is a wilderness, and people are losing faith in humanity and sadly in the church. Gavin Ortland of Truth Unites says this. He says about 40 million people just in the US now have stopped going to church. The percentage of people who don't have any religious affiliation has spiked up 30%. 30 years ago, it was only 5% of the people in the US, 30%, this massive change, especially in the younger generation, especially in that Generation Z who are the 18 to 22 years old. So there's much need, there's much brokenness, there's lots of hopelessness. However, I believe that God is doing a new thing. God, as he has worked through the millenniums with his people, God is working with his people today. And he wants us to embrace this new thing. Instead of stepping back and defending, he wants us to step forward and to serve. Think of this verse here in Isaiah 43, verse 19. For I'm about to do something new. See, I have already begun. Do you not see it? I will make a pathway through the wilderness. I will create rivers in the dry wasteland. God sees it. God is seeing, he's seeing rivers. He's seeing rivers in the desert. But there's many times we respond like Thomas and say, only if we can see it will we believe. Like if we can tangibly see it, we'll believe it. But God wants us to believe it by faith and then to work that out. When God sees an army, we see broken, mangled, broken lives. When God sees a haven for birds, cattle, and humans, an oasis in the desert, too many times we just see cracked, baked clay. But brothers and sisters, to those who are listening, God is doing a new thing, and he wants us to be part of that. God is calling us to influence our world from the margins, to move into the center, to bring the good news of a new king, of a new nation, a new kingdom. And the church has always faced this. Like, this isn't new. Things have always looked impossible. But those followers of Jesus have believed it's possible, not because of us, but because of God, because we serve a God of the impossible. C.S. Lewis says this. He said, human life has always lived on the edge of a precipice. Human culture has always had to exist under the shadow of something infinitely more important than itself. If men have postponed the search for knowledge and beauty until they were secure, the search would never have begun. And so my burden is that we begin this morning, that we don't get analysis paralysis, that we don't get fear and draw back, but that we move forward, that we just take that baby step forward. The late Tim Keller says this in a recent article that he wrote probably in the last 2 years. Like I said, he's no longer living, but he said this. He said, the Christian church in the West faces the first post-Christian, deeply secular culture in history. It has not yet developed a way. Christianity, the Christian church, hasn't developed a way to do evangelism with the secular and with the nones, those who, that huge percentage who say we're not really of any religious affiliation. We're agnostics. We don't believe in anything. We haven't figured out how to get that a way that gains traction and sees these people regularly coming to the faith. And he goes on to say, what we need to do is we need to figure out the means, a way to do this that will entail a mobilization of lay people in evangelism as in the early church, where normal people are reaching out. And then the content or maybe the catalyst or the platform needs to show and demonstrate to deeply skeptical people that Christianity is respectable, desirable, and believable. And so he's helping us see that the issue of our day, and then challenging us with or helping us think about what are ways that we're going to reach the world around us. And so I want to move into 3 points here that I want to lay out, 3 main points, practical phrases that begin with the letter E. And it's not easy phrases. It's very things that will stretch us beyond our capacity. But I believe it's by God's grace we can do these things as we help each other and provoke each other to love and good works. And these phrases go like, and these topics or these points, these 3 main points will be these. Number 1 is extend your table. Number 2, exercise unreasonable hospitality. And number 3, engage in dignifying conversations. So we'll hop right in here, but I want to say up front is that I in no way want you to think that I have achieved these things. These are things that I am attempting to do in small ways, and I want to grow in these. I go through seasons and I go through ebbs and flows in my life as anyone else, and I just see the incredible need for me to in just a small way attempt to do some of the things that I want to lay out here this morning. So I wanted to put that up front. I in no way am achieving these points. So number one, extend your table. Let's hop right in here. So do you have a table? And I think most of us say, yeah, I absolutely. All of us have a table. You would be quite unusual if where you live, what you call home, if it doesn't have a table. But my question for you is, do you have a table? It might mean a regular table, but I want us to think about the spiritual aspect, this spiritual, literal aspect of a table, okay? A table, if we think about it, has a lot of symbolism. It's very symbolic. It's symbolic of relationships, of food, of family, of hospitality, of love, of acceptance, of relationships. To be seated at a table is to be human. Dining, food are the great equalizers, and everyone does that. Everyone. Every culture has a culture around that table, that place where you eat. And so to be part of being a person on this planet is understanding this table, not only the literal tangible aspects of it, but the spiritual aspects of it. Maybe they haven't thought about it, but it's there. We all experience the tangible food, but yet also the human spiritual part of these things. God himself waits on tables. Have you ever thought about that? Think about the Old Testament. There's many places there where God is giving commandments to the children of Israel. Think about the temple or the tabernacle. There was a table there with bread on it that the priests actually ate from. Think about even before the tabernacle. Think about in Exodus 24, 9 through 11, these incredible verses here where God is there at Mount Sinai and God is giving the law, and Moses and Aaron and Nadab, Abihu, and these 70 elders, they go up to the mountain, and it says that they saw God's, in part, they saw God's place, and there they ate and drank. Like there was this divine meal that was prepared for them. What about our favorite psalm, and maybe one of the favorite verses that many, many people have over the millenniums have quoted millions of times? You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You have anointed my head with oil. My cup runs over. So thinking about this idea of a literal table, a spiritual table. God prepares a table for us in the wilderness. The story of Jesus. Also, think of God's Son, God's most intimate revelation, and how he related to people around him. Many times he had table fellowship. And I love that little lesson he teaches in Luke 22. He says, who is greater, the one who is at the table or the one who serves? It's a rhetorical question, but he goes on to answer it. It's not the one who is is it not the one who is at the table? But I am among you as the one who serves. Jesus saw himself as serving tables. Think about it. The creator of the world, God in the flesh, serving his creation, and actually thinking about his creation as the one who is greater. An amazing idea. Of course, the Emmaus Road, we'll be touching on that later here. But there he is. He reclines the table. He took the bread, he blessed it and broke it. This revelation came. A table is a place where Christ can be embodied in the world through blessing, breaking, giving, and nourishment. And as one writer has said, the most powerful and often most neglected sacrament we have is the table. The table in our home, the table in our neighborhood, the table in our workplace. End of quote. So, as Christ followers, I believe deeply that at this table, we get to mediate the grace of heaven on earth. And we can, in tangible ways, reach out to our neighbors, to those strangers, to our family, to our church. You know, this message I'm giving here isn't all about evangelism. Paul teaches us there in Galatians, do good to the, let me just catch that verse here real quick. Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all, especially to those of the household of faith. So this message is about really us serving those that are around us, those are our neighbors. Okay, let's think about the word extend for a little bit. So we're in this first point here, extend your table. Now, many people have a table, as I talked about earlier, but how many of you have a table that extends? Raise your hand. I can see some of you. Raise your hand. Okay. Maybe 70, 80%. I grew up in a home where our table could stretch a mile, not quite, but it felt that way. All right. You know, we had leaves in the closet, and you would put them in, you would stretch that table out, and you could have a lot of people around that table. And a table that extends isn't that common of an idea. But again, you know, we're talking about this spiritual extension, all right? It could be literal, but it's that spiritual idea that's way more real, that spiritual, literal idea. The kingdom extension is captured in the two words of Jesus, go and love. So think of Matthew 28, the Great Commission, go into the world, teaching all nations, making disciples of all nations, baptizing them, teaching them to observe all things, all right? So table extension is all about the Great Commission, all about going and making disciples. And then also love. Think of the greatest commandments. Love God, heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And so really, this extension idea can be captured in one phrase, go and love. It means to go where it hasn't been before. It means to extend the places that we have never been before. And again, there's just a lot of this teaching that Jesus gives. Think of the parable of the talents, Matthew 25. You know, a table extension is the opposite of the hole digger servant. All right. The guy who's trying to preserve. That's not table extension. That's preservation. And that's defense. That's the opposite of what Jesus wants us to do. He wants us to extend, to invest our talents, to go into the world, to be in the world, not of it, but in the world, investing these gifts that God has given us, these talents that God has given us. So, and also, of course, we have the sobering passage there in Luke 14. I'm just going to quote this or read this here, Luke 14, verses 12 through 14, quoting here. Then he also said to him who invited him, when you give a dinner or a supper, do not ask your friends, your brothers, your relatives, nor rich neighbors, lest they also invite you back and you be repaid. But when you give a feast, invite the poor, the maimed, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed, because they cannot repay you, for you shall be repaid at the resurrection of the just. So again, just as in Matthew 25, Jesus is trying to get us to understand this idea of investment in something that's an eternal investment. That is not about reciprocity, where I scratch your back, you scratch mine, but it's all about generosity. It's all about this idea of abundance, not scarcity. And it's about reaching out to those who will never invite you back. And this is a sobering teaching here. Jesus had fellowship with people from every walk of life. Think about it. The nationalistic zealots, the prostitutes, the tax collectors, people who were looked down on in society. He had table fellowship. And we can't really understand hardly the Middle East culture. Like if you eat with somebody, if you dine with somebody, you're saying, I'm one with you. And that's what Jesus did. We often speak of following Jesus and being obedient to him. We call ourselves followers of Jesus. And so the challenge for us is, does this diversity of fellowship that Jesus had, does this match our current lifestyle? Or is your lifestyle, is your experience more same with others? I get together with my friends. I have people in my social demographic, ethnic demographic to my place, and they invite me back. There's this reciprocity idea. Or are you actually following Jesus and living in that diversity of fellowship as we see him, table fellowship as we see him doing? Mark Gladwell says this so well. We learn from Jesus' fellowship meals that our tables should be places of radical welcome, especially for those who are lonely and on the outside. This is the shape of the kingdom of God. Okay, so let's a couple action points here about table extension, about extending our tables. How do we do that? I have a couple action points, then we'll jump into our next point here. So, first of all, begin to pray for ways to extend your table. Begin to pray for ways. I think that's so important. Lord, today, make it possible for me to meet one person who I can talk with, who I can share with, who I can extend my table to. And I think about how just a month or two ago, I guess it was longer than that, maybe 3 months ago, I was feeling sad about my lack of outreach in my life. And I prayed one morning as I headed to the cafe, Lord, I want to have one conversation, meaningful spiritual conversation with somebody today. And before I could lay the hand on the door of our cafe, I was almost accosted by somebody who had a lot of questions about who we were. And it would end up being this 10, 15-minute conversation. And I had just prayed, and it's really spoke to my heart. I thank the Lord for that. It was a faith builder. It was invigorating. It was life-giving to be able to share to an agnostic Christianity and why we do the things that we do. Use your home. Bring people into your home sends a powerful message. But we'll touch on this later, but it takes relationship to have people into your home. People just don't, typically, unless there's a crisis, come into your home. You need to build a relationship with others. So those are 2 action points here. Let's jump in to the next point, number 2. Exercise unreasonable hospitality. Remember the story back at the beginning of the unreasonable hospitality that I got to be served, be part of there in the mountains of Iraq. Unreasonable hospitality. I was the person on the outside. I had never experienced such fear in my heart. I was so fearful. I was the minority. I was the one who could be taken advantage of. But I was welcomed in with smiles and service and the most epic picnic ever. Let's think about the word hospitality just for a moment. I've shared this before, but I'll share it again. The Greek word for hospitality is this, philioxenoth or philioxenoth. Philio, think of that. It's one of the Greek words of love, and it means brotherly love, to love like a brother or like a family member. Xenoth means stranger. And a word that's the opposite of philioxenoth is a word that we hear thrown around a lot in our contemporary culture, and that is xenophobia. I'm sure you've heard that word before. And xenophobia is a growing movement in our world. Not only in the United States, as there's lots of migrants coming in, but globally, there's this movement of displaced people and so many needs, and people are moving into wealthier nations. And at first, secular people want to welcome migrants until it begins to hurt them. And then it's over. We want them out. Don't bring them here. And so xenophobia is a growing issue in our day. And so it's you think about phobia is the fear of something. And I have a phobia of mice. I'll get up on a couch when there's a mouse flying around and my family kills it. My son has a phobia of spiders. I mean, just incredible phobia. And so it's that deep fear that just it'll motivate you to do irrational things. All right. So that is what many people are experiencing, this xenophobia. But we can know as look at the Bible that God wants his people to be the opposite of that, to be those of philioxenia, those who love strangers as a family member. And you just look at the storyline of the Bible, all right? So you just look at right in Genesis, we had these incredible stories of Abraham, how he served those angels that came to him, or men, but they were angels. I mean, just if you look at that account, you can see he ran to meet them. He bowed to the ground. He said, Sarah, quickly go make a meal, kill the fatted calf. This incredible hospitality that he showed there. And that really was his life. And his Lot, his nephew Lot exemplified a lot of those same things there in Sodom. And he says there he urged them strongly to prepare a feast. And Glenn Martin's book, Unrighteous Lot, helps you see in a fuller sense, pulling from writings of the other Jewish literature, how that this was a lifestyle that Abraham and Lot had cultivated. And they had a lifestyle of hospitality, and it shone through in so many ways. But let's just back up a little bit further, if you will, right into the Garden of Eden. Think about how God created this amazing place, and he brought humans into it, and he himself came and walked with them. God himself is the ultimate host. So then moving on up through scripture, the Old Testament, to love your stranger, we see that teaching to the children of Israel. Right into the New Testament, we see Jesus living that out and really taking that to the next level in how we should be relating to those people around us, to those who are on the outside. Of course, then we have the teaching of the apostles to share with the saints in their need, pursue hospitality. So thinking of that teaching there in Galatians, do good to all people as much as possible, but especially to the household of faith. This idea of hospitality, of love of strangers, is a lifestyle. I believe it's at the heart of the gospel. It is at the heart of kingdom advance. And we see that in the early church. There's just lots of resources, whether it's the Patient Ferment of the early church, or the book by Brian Fickert called When Helping Hurts, where these people look at the early church and there's and drawing from the writings, make the case that the expansion of the early church was just through simple simple acts of service to those around them. It was the foundational block for the success of the early church. And the world saw it, the pagans saw it, and it caught their attention. And then, of course, also in this new religion, these Jesus communities, there came this idea of like, we're brothers. So across ethnic boundaries, across country borders, these Jesus followers traveled to the other communities just to visit. and these other communities welcomed them in. They were strangers. They were of a different ethnicity, of a different nationality, but they said, welcome here. You are one with us. Jesus is our elder brother. God's our father. And there was this incredible testimony as well as these Christians showed hospitality to each other. And I just think that in our day today, we're so quickly losing that among our churches. The Anabaptists have always been known to be those who welcome people into their homes, but we're losing that. It's easier to grab a motel or some house for rent on Airbnb than to call up a local brother and say, hey, I'm in the area. Can we stay with you? We need to revive those things. And it begins with us inviting people into our homes, into our lives. And so we're thinking here of this idea of exercising unreasonable hospitality. It's not rational, it's irrational to the world. And it leaves a powerful testimony. And it's a way the kingdom can be advanced. So I have a couple action points here. I want to lay out what I call the Emmaus Road hospitality map. And it's 3 4-letter words. Walk, talk, dine. Walk, talk, dine. And this is taken from Luke 24. There was that incredible story. After Jesus' resurrection, he comes and he walks with these 2 disciples on the road to Emmaus. And he gets in there on this walk, this mundane, that's how they got from one place to the other. It's just 2 disciples walking on this dirty road, gravel road, probably dusty road. Jesus comes and walks with them. And it's in this mundane activity that heaven comes to earth. It's in this mundane activity that Jesus becomes just like one of them. So I want you to think about how in your life can you walk with people? What does that look like? Where are you walking with people? And how can you be like Jesus and just enter into that mundane part of life and be there for them? The next point I have is talk, right? Walk, talk, dine. And so many times we think that we need to have spiritual conversations, that we need to lead the conversation, that we need to be one on the stump teaching. But what did Jesus do? And we'll get into talk and conversation in our next point here. But just on this part here, let's think about 2 things, several things that Jesus did, I think, that are so important. And as he begins this little trek with them, what does he do immediately? Does he begin to teach them, instruct them, show them his wisdom? What does Jesus do? He asks questions, and not just one question. He asks 2 questions. Why are you sad? When was the last time you asked somebody why they look sad? An interesting point here that Heather makes in her book is that so many times we ask boring questions like, how are you? And no one's, just this rhetorical question. No one's honest. It's just like saying, I don't want to talk with you. Or I just want to do the basic. People actually like a personal question. And that's what Jesus does. He goes, why are you sad? And they tell him, and then he goes, well, what things? What's going on? And so he asked these 2 questions, and I think that is so crucial. We need people who ask questions. Remember, as teachers know, it's not the answer that enlightens, it's the question. All right, so thinking here about walk, talk, and now we'll go to our last 4-letter word, and that is dine. Eat with people. Literally eat with people. Figure out ways that you can have a meal with people, and that can be very difficult. I can attest to that. It can be difficult to get neighbors into your home. And as I talked about earlier, we need to have a relationship to find ways to walk with people, to talk with people, to build these relationships so we can actually dine with them. And what's really fascinating about the Emmaus Road story is that the disciples, Jesus actually acts like it. I'm not sure if he really was real here, but he's like, I'm going to keep on going. And those disciples are like, no way, what? Where are you going? You come with us. It's late in the day. You come eat with us. And so these people he's walking with persuade him to dine with them. It's most fascinating when you look into that story. And so people who won't respond to come eat at your place with a cold call, right? We all know what cold callers are. Our phone rings and it's some person bugging us to buy some kind of life insurance or whatever. And it's frustrating. We have no interest. Hang up happens, is our normal response. Sorry, we're not interested. And that's, people, this idea of dining, you need to have a relationship. They won't respond to a cold call unless there's a crisis. And in a little bit, I'm going to tell you a story of Tom that I met yesterday, where something happened that I was able to, in 10 minutes time, be having a coffee with this young man. So people won't respond to cold calls. And as someone has said, Jesus ate his way through the Gospels. So he was doing meals with people. He was eating with people, which is a very Middle Eastern thing, very relational. And that shows us how we are one. Doing meals with people means that we are one with them, that we're human with them. Also, it doesn't have to be you making a meal. It could just be a potluck. Hey, everyone, bring food. Jesus often ate at other people's tables as well. And so we have these 3 points: walk, talk, and dine. And I could tell you the story here, and I often do, of Rosaria Butterfield. The Gospel Comes with a House Key, or her other book, The Secret Thoughts of an Unlikely Convert. Highly recommend these books. But Rosaria was a lesbian lady leading the movement, the LGBTQ movement back in the 90s. And she hated Christianity, but one day was invited by a pastor into their home, and through that she became a Christian. I won't tell me the details of that because I want to tell you the story of Tom, something that happened to me yesterday. So yesterday morning, I was right here at my desk preparing for this talk, and on a whim, I decided to take several of my children to our cafe. My wife was actually gone, and get them a little treat. And so we ran into our cafe. I parked down the parking lot from our store, and I get out and I meet one of our customers coming down the sidewalk. And we're there just chit-chatting with him. My children are right there, and all of a sudden we heard this shouting, and I just turned and looked into the store, the little restaurant that we're in front of, not ours, somebody else's, and I see this young man, very upset and just shouting at the person, at the cashier, and the cashier, according to my children, was shouting back at him too. So there was this highly very agitated situation that was just instantly in our face. And as I'm processing this and realizing, whoa, this could go bad, and I'm thinking, let's get out of here. Let's leave. I'm out of here with my children. And I turn to my children to tell them to say, let's go. And at that moment, this man who was shouting, young man, is all of a sudden on the sidewalk right in front of us. He exited the restaurant in a hurry, and I'm right faced this man. And there's part of me that says, just ignore and walk as fast as you can. But it hit me, this could be an opportunity for me to be Christ to this man. And I began to, as much as I was thinking of moving, I just realized that I can't do that. God calls us to be peacemakers, and somehow I need to bring peace to this situation. And so I look at this man in the face and say, I'm sorry that you're upset. And I felt like God was giving me the words to say to him. And I said, I'm sorry. I'm here for you. Can we talk? And within a minute or two, this young man was crying. And we talked some more, and I said, I can pray with you, whatever. Let's sit down and talk. And pretty soon this man was explaining a little bit why he was so upset. There was something that happened there. It was actually an old relationship where this man was not nice to him, and he snapped. And my children were there. I told them to leave in a minute because I just didn't know which way this whole thing was going to go. And so we ended up walking down the street, down the sidewalk to our restaurant, and I invited him in to our cafe. We came in and we got a coffee and we sat down as a family and we talked, and I could see this man just coming off of this anger to where he was just exhausted. And we began to talk. We ended up talking for a little while there. But and I say that story because it was so much of me that this wasn't me. I felt like a divine interaction, something that God just brought right into my life. And like I almost walked away, almost did it because I was busy, and it hit me just how ironic this is, how I'm, want to be a person who extends tables in the wilderness, and how I want to walk away from this situation that felt so volatile, so scary. But by God's grace, pressed through. We talked together, we walked together, and as I did that down the sidewalk, I could tell this young man was calming down. Like I said, he was soon weeping. And it was just such a sad situation. And the talk with him, I realized that he lives by himself. He's lost his job. Just so many things are going wrong in his life. And by God's grace, I was able to extend a table to him. And so the Emmaus Road hospitality map: walk, talk, dine. Pray for ways to do that, and God will give you ways to do that. Even in the most unexpected ways. And it's almost never can you go in a 5-minute period from talking and walking to dining with somebody. That can take 3 or 5 years sometimes. It takes a lot of patience, unless there's a crisis. And that was a lesson I took. Here was a crisis. And when people are in a crisis, that is when you can really go somewhere with somebody. And it was a lesson learned. Like I almost missed the opportunity to serve somebody in a crisis. And how many of those have I missed? Many of those. Lord help us. So hardly anything more characteristic of there is hardly anything more characteristic of Christianity than hospitality. It's through the ministry of hospitality that we share the things we value most: our time, our privacy, our food, our financial resources, our home. In other words, we share our lives. And Rosaria says this in this book: hospitality is not PhD Christianity, it's ABC Christianity. And even children can do that. Children can be taught to be kind to strangers. And so moving into our last point here that I have, the last E phrase, is engage in dignifying conversations. A short little story here. About 6 months, as many of us know, 6 months ago, Hamas did this horrific attack on the nation of Israel. And there's a story that comes out of that that I would like to just talk about for a second. So in thinking of this word, this idea of engage in dignifying conversations, this happened to an Israeli lady. Her name is Rachel. And Rachel was known. Rachel, her home was invaded by several Hamas militants. She lived in one of those little, I'm forgetting the Israeli name, a little community right on the border there with with Gaza. And all of a sudden, she finds herself with 5 of these Hamas men toting grenades, guns in her living room. And Rachel, who was known for her hospitality and generosity, began to serve them tea and her favorite Moroccan cookies. As a gun battle raged outside, Rachel hosted a 20-hour tea party inside. And taking this from an article, after one of the grenade-toting gunmen struck Rachel across the face with the butt of his gun, Rachel soothed him. She served the militants canned pineapple, tea, her Moroccan cookies. She sang to them, notice, Arabic songs, and they sang back to her Hebrew ones. Okay? Rachel's Hebrew, right? She's Jewish. Gaza, these men are Muslim. They are, and they speak in Arabic, and so they are singing to each other in their opposite, the other person's language, their songs. She offered the men Coke Zero, and they said they preferred Coca-Cola, which she obliged and she got for them. So we began to eat and drink together, and these men calmed down. And Rachel goes on to say, one of the terrorists said, "You remind me of my mother." And I told him, "I'm really like your mother. I will help you. I'm here to take care of you. What can I do for you?" Sadly, the Israeli military, after 20 hours, burst into this room. Somehow they figured out that there were some Hamas people in there, and these Hamas men were killed. And as you know, the war goes on, and it's incredible atrocities have happened then and are happening to this day. But Rachel, reflecting on this experience, said this. She said, "I started having a conversation with these Hamas men, and at one point, I forgot that they were terrorists." And in other words, we realized, and they forgot that she was Jewish, who they hated. And they began to relate to each other in ways that were humans should relate to each other. They began having a dignifying conversation. And they began having small talk. If we could understand as Christians the importance of small talk, as this lady did, for Rachel, it was a life and death situation. If we could just understand the importance of chit chat, of small talk, and how that could help us be more effective in showing Christ, could you imagine how much impact we could have in the world if we would look at it as a life or death situation, as Rachel did? Remember, small talk is not small talk. It is very important talk. And so we're thinking about engaging with dignifying conversations. I want to wrap up here right shortly, so just stick with me here. Think about the conversation with God in the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve walking in the garden, God walking with them, talking together. Can you imagine what that was like? Can you imagine the dignifying conversations and small talk they had, the chit chat? I can't imagine. And of course, we have it, in that most intimate revelation of God, and as Jesus, him entering into many of these dignifying conversations. As somebody has said, Jesus, he had a 3-year camping trip across Israel with his disciples. Many campfires, many meals, many walks, many talks, and I'm sure many small talks. But remember, small talk is never small. So I want to look at an action point here of engaging in dignifying conversation. And I'm going to take these action points out of Heather's book. So just really quick, Heather Holman is actually a Penn State professor here in State College. A gentleman who actually listens to Strength to Strength emailed our cafe and said, "Hey, do you know about this book? I think you should read it if you don't." And by the way, she's a Penn State professor, and I'd never heard of it. And so I got the book and read it and was really challenged by it. And actually, recently, we actually had Heather Holman and her husband, James Ashley. He and his wife taught a class. We had 4 classes at our cafe called the Better Conversations Workshop. and off this book, which is this book. She's a Christian lady, and she's written this book from a biblical worldview. It's very powerful. And they taught a class at our cafe in the evening. We had it packed out. We found out, as we were suspicious, that people are very interested in trying to figure out how can we talk together, and so we had an incredible time. But Heather lays out at the beginning what she calls the 4 mindsets of a loving conversation. I want to give you these 4 mindsets, and then we'll be done. The number 1 mindset, okay, framework, think about it. The number 1 she has is be curious. So I'm sure many of us have been around somebody who was not curious about us. You sat across the table from them, you met them somewhere, they had no questions for you, they ignored you, and it hurt. Maybe it was even a family member who was just giving you the cold shoulder, was not curious about your day or your life or your ministry or whatever, and it hurt. But the opposite of that is be curious. Ask people about who they are. And remember, read the book, but she makes a case that people actually like personal questions that kind of probe deeper than how are you? So pray about how can I be curious about people? Ask questions as Jesus did. Remember those 2 questions. So number 1 is be curious. We'll move these pretty quickly. You can get the book and read it. And by the way, we actually sell it on Strength to Strength. The second is believe the best. Have you ever struggled with believing the best in others? And it's actually a joke in our family because we have made conclusions about neighbors and people we've observed and found out later that we're totally wrong. We have a gentleman coming to our church. Now he faithfully attends every Sunday who 7 years ago, we concluded that he wouldn't talk with anybody. And through the work of our short time with him and other people in our church reaching out to him, he's become he's the opposite of what we concluded he was, the absolute opposite. And we remind ourselves often of that wrong conclusion. We did not believe the best. And so the point here is believe the best. Innocent until proven guilty, give others a benefit of the doubt. And if you want heaven to come to earth, put this one to work. Believe the best. Believe the best in people. Try to remember that every person they have a story, they have brokenness, they have issues, they have rejection, and they've been given a lie. And that it's our job as Christians to help expose that to them. And I think of my new friend, Tom, which is, by the way, that's not his name. I'm using it as an alias. My new friend, Tom, from just yesterday, he told a little bit of his story, and I could begin to realize that this young man has some difficult things in his life, one of those being loneliness. Okay, moving on. Number 3, express concern. When someone shares with you, maybe a challenge or an issue, and it might be the smallest thing. So remember, people don't typically share vulnerably. It might be the smallest thing. Express concern. Wow, I'm sorry to hear that. Or, wow, let's think about that. Or, how can I pray? I'll pray for you on that. Or whatever. Pray right then. Remember, Jesus said, "Bear one another's burdens," and in doing that, you fulfill the law of Christ. I'm sorry, Paul said that in Galatians. So the third, express concern. And then the fourth one is share your life. All right. Share your life. When you begin to share about your struggles, your challenges, who you are, it's an example for others to follow. And they see that, oh, you're real. Oh, you have issues. I think of the time when I shared about how 2 of my neighbors didn't like me with my atheist friend who I've been meeting with regularly. And that was hard. I found myself, didn't feel like a really good Christian person to say that I have 2 neighbors who hate me right now. And thankfully we've been able to make some progress on that. But I didn't feel like a good person to say that. But when I did that, he began to problem solve with me, and he got to see, and looking back on it later, he got to see that, hey, I'm just a human with challenges like anybody else. So share your life. So those four things, those four mindsets or frameworks: be curious, believe the best, express concern, share your life. She also has the 6 conversation pathways that she taught us. Her and her husband taught us in that class, which she lays on the book here. Get the book, read the book. I think it'll impact you in your life. Okay, so in wrap up here, N.T. Wright says this: our primary task is not so much to give answers to impossible philosophical questions as to bring signs of God's new world to birth. And it is through this ABC Christianity, through hospitality, through love of strangers, that heaven comes to earth. And that is our task as Christ followers. We can put that to work every day in simple ways, and the impact from that, I believe, will be huge. What if every kingdom Christian would put this to work? Can you imagine the impact they would have in their day? And so we looked at 3 points: extend your table, exercise unreasonable hospitality, and engage in dignifying conversations. And do that please don't do this for yourself. Don't do this for your church even. Do this for God and his kingdom. And of course, for the expansion of the church. That might sound like a dichotomy or a contradiction, but do it for the church, for the expansion of God's kingdom. And remember, all this outreach, all this serving is for that people can experience moving from the kingdom of darkness into light, being baptized into a local body where they can corporately then share this beautiful kingdom of God on earth. And I want to just read several paragraphs here in wrap up out of the book Beauty Will Save the World by Brian Zen. So just listen for a little bit as we think about, as a church, as we live out these lives of hospitality, what this could do for the world. Beginning here in his book, on November 13, 2010, the 80 Voice Chorus of Niagara from Niagara Falls, Ontario, gave a performance of the Hallelujah Chorus for Handel's Messiah. This would not be particularly noteworthy, except that it was done as a surprise performance in the food court of the Seaway Mall. The unsuspecting shoppers didn't see it coming. It was just another busy lunch hour in the food court at the mall. Then a young woman with a cell phone pressed to her ear stood up and began to sing Hallelujah. While people were trying to figure out what was going on, the first singer is joined by a man who, moments earlier, had been eating his Arby's lunch. Then what appears to be a mall custodian joins the chorus. Eventually, all 80 voices of the choir are performing a stunning rendition of Handel's masterpiece. The shoppers in the food court are stunned. They realize something special has happened. Some capture the performance on their cell phones. Others rise to join in the time-honored tradition of standing for the Hallelujah Chorus. Some simply sit with faces full of wonder, while others wipe away tears. All are witnesses of a miracle. The modern banality of a shopping mall food court has been transformed into a cathedral of astonishing beauty. Several paragraphs later, again, as Brian writes, this random act of culture in Ontario is a wonderful metaphor for how the church should position itself in the world. Instead of angry protesters shaking a fist at a secular culture, we should be joyful singers, transforming the secular with the sacred. Instead of alienated separatists sequestered in Christian enclaves, we are to transform malls and food courts into cathedrals by our beautiful song. If the church of the 21st century will lay down its anger and frustration and instead joyfully sing the melody of Christ in the malls of meaninglessness, we could perhaps once again astonish a weary world with the beauty of the gospel. End of quote. God bless you as you serve the King right where you're called. And back to you, Brother Sam.
Amen. Thank you. That was a beautiful way to end that and focus our minds on the beauty of the gospel, because it truly is beautiful. This is our time for questions, comments. So we'll open it up to the audience to share what impacted you or questions you have for Brother Bryant about the things that he talked about. So feel free to unmute yourself and share whatever you have to share. There was a lot of things going through my mind in listening to this. This definitely isn't just a prescribed method, is it? It's truly a way of life, like a change of thinking. I'm trying to think about what I should ask questions about here. And so you started out with the wilderness. I think that was a very fitting place to begin. Let's have our perceptions set properly right out of the gate. Where are we and what are we up against? And how do you see that perception as a motivator? Recognizing where we are and who we're surrounded with in the communities that we live in. And where does that motivation come from, I guess?
Yeah, so there is a lot of beauty in our world.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to celebrate that, even in our atheist friends. I sit with my atheist friend typically once a month, and there's things that he teaches me. He's a good father and a good husband in many ways. And I celebrate that because I see God in him. We're made in God's image. And so let's look for ways. Let's not be these naysayers, that it's all dark and no good. No, there's good. Let's look for that good. And I think that the conversational frameworks lays that out, be curious, believe the best. You look for that good and you celebrate that. But however, we live in a world, we cannot be naive. I think many times we are naive of the principalities and powers, especially the spiritual hosts of wickedness in heavenly places that we're up against. We're naive to the spiritual warfare that we're up against. Leslie Newbig talks about that. I have his quote here somewhere. I won't find it right now, but he says that we're up against these things and that we need to be a church that's praying. Acknowledging the darkness, exposing it, lighting a candle, putting on a candlestick with others, not by ourselves. We need others, being that city on a hill together. And we can chase away the darkness. We can have incredible impact.
Mm-hmm.
But ignite, yeah.
I saw through all of this, through your whole talk, this remembering that we are human and what humans need. And so in facing the wilderness or facing the darkness around, to not other these people and say that there's something, that we have the light, we are right, and now we're coming to you, to recognize that was us. And that there's things in our lives that we're wrestling with and figuring out in Jesus Christ that they can relate to. I think that is something that can be very helpful in not only recognizing the darkness, but saying, I've been there and I'm in this body as well and in this world as well. And these things grieve me. These things make me sad. These things are pain points in my life.
Yeah. Yeah, there's wilderness right here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank
that's
you,
a good
brother.
point, Sam.
Brother Paul shared the YouTube video of the Hallelujah course in the mall. So if you have time later to listen to that. I'm sure you and I could talk about this all day, but I want to open it up to any of you who have questions or comments.
Brother Bryant, I really appreciated the message this morning. Um, there's a lot I could, share, but I appreciate I thought of Timothy Keller and the quote that you read from him. And we're living in a post-Christian secular culture. There was a lot of other, the early Christians lived in a uh, very morally corrupt and depraved culture, but it was different than what we are experiencing because everybody that we're surrounded with has an opinion about Christianity, and they have a view of Christianity, and so to show Christ to them and show what the teachings of Christ are, and it's often very different from what they perceive Christianity to be. And I just had a conversation with a client yesterday because it's election season and the State of the Union address just a few days ago. And of course, he had a very low view of Christians because Christians all vote for Trump, and uh, Christians just want power, and they are very xenophobic and all that. And so uh, and I shared with him, I want to represent Jesus. I understand there's so much in the world that's represented as Christianity, and I don't defend that at all. I I find as much wrong with it as you do, and I represent Jesus. Jesus loved his everybody, his neighbors, the immigrant, the marginalized, the poor. And so that's who I represent as a Christian. And also just your table and inviting people to your house is one of the most powerful evangelizing tools in the world. And we have made really good friends just like where we live. I just think of a Chinese couple that we've met at the park. Their children were playing there. Their one child was playing there, and my children were playing there. I met them at the park, struck up a conversation with them, and then a few weeks later, invited them to our house, and they just loved it. I don't think they were ever in an American house, like invited into somebody's house to have dinner and sitting around the table and praying and having a conversation. And they just really loved it. And now I met them later in the grocery store, and they just like we have some really good friends there and them now. We invited them again a few weeks ago. They weren't able to make it, but we'll have them again
Wonderful.
sometime soon. So it's just very powerful when you can share your life, share the love of Jesus with them, your neighbors, people you meet at the park, your
Yes.
clients, whoever.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Yeah, we need to show people that Christianity is true and then tell them it's true. So it's really the heart and then the mind I think is for the most part is our culture that we live in. And yes, it's through that living among, that walking and talking, and then we can tell them. Walking, talking, and dining. Yeah, great. Thank you, Paul. Anything more?
What is your thoughts on balancing out what Paul says about doing good to all men, especially to the household of faith, so especially to the church, and then uh, what Jesus says about inviting, not inviting, inviting the stranger, and because it so often seems like for us, we see either we're focusing on the one, and that's taking preeminence, or we're focusing on the other. It like it seems like it's they don't
Yeah.
they don't flow together very well.
Yeah,
Like,
I can
yeah,
understand that, and I think there's attention to that. I think when we look at the Gospels and the teaching of Jesus in context, that we know that he's not saying only do this, but he is doing a very direct teaching and a
right.
very important teaching here. And so, I've thought about it this way. Maybe an example could be a business, or it could be our cafe. If our team at Sowers is not doing well, if we're not taking good care of them and doing well together, we're going to do a terrible job at serving our guests. And it's the same within the church. It's assumed. Jesus is assuming that you have a family, and he makes that teaching. And it's a family, like it's the new family, the family of God, and he's assuming that you're living as a family, and we see the early church doing that. Okay,
Mhm.
now it wasn't a shiny shoe show on Sunday morning; it was way beyond. It was a Sunday. It was a Sunday service. It was a meal. It was time together, and it was life together. But are you inviting people from the outside in? And so, yeah, so that um, there's an assumption there, uh, other teachings that we see Jesus and then lived, taught by the apostles and lived out in the church and in the early church, then as commentary to help us understand what that looks like. But yeah,
Right.
it can be, I think there's ebbs and flows. There's times when maybe we're spending more time with those that we're discipling, maybe less with our church in some ways. But obviously, if that's a trend, and maybe there's those that are more gifted in that, okay, in
Hmm.
that evangelism, and more gifted those who are shepherding and part of the, that. And so we need to bless each other's gifts too. And I think that's
Right.
beautiful and powerful when a church can actually do that.
Hmm.
So it's a corporate church together doing this, and that's how we're a city.
Right.
On a hill.
Yeah. Right.
Ye are the light of the earth. Ye is plural,
It's not just
uh,
one. It's not just
not just
us.
one. Yeah.
Right. Right.
So we need to do it together as a church without apology, and that means family together, time together. But
Mhm.
are we including others that will never invite us back?
Right. Right. And one other thought, kind of along that line is, what do you, how do you view? So let's say you're at your cafe or wherever you are, and so for you or your wife or whatever, a person of the other gender, opposite gender, as you comes up and start striking up a conversation. How do you keep proper? What's your
Mhm.
how do you balance the extending your table and also um, not taking things too far?
Yeah, well, I think that's a really important conversation, and definitely you need to be very wise and very careful in our world and not naive to what is
Right.
going on, and to be living a life of integrity first, of course. And then, and yes, very any kind of cross gender interactions or of any extent needs to be in the company of others who are walking with you. And
Hmm.
so, yes, very careful with that. Absolutely.
So would you do a follow up? Say, hey, um, I got to keep on moving. My wife will follow up with you. Do you do that, or do you try and find someone else close by that can step
Sure.
into your place?
Mhm. Yeah, oftentimes there could be another sister maybe that you could pull in. But yeah, I think any kind of extended conversation ongoing needs to be
Right.
gender specific. So yes,
Exactly.
absolutely.
Something that
And that's
we
where
often.
that's where sisters, you need to single sisters, they can that's they can reach out to these ladies. They are that's their ministry, and they can do that. And we need to help them be prepared to equipped to do that, of course. But yeah,
Yeah.
those are good questions. There's a really all both of those are really good questions, things to grapple with, and for sure, uh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks a lot.
Thanks for your questions, Bradley. there is one more thing that I would like to bring out here or to ask you about. You touched on, spoke specifically to two aspects of ministry, that extending your cafe or extending your table. It is obviously a ministry to the world, to the lost souls around us, and it's also a ministry to the body of Christ, to one another. And I think, in a way, you did touch on this a little bit in mentioning that your children were with you, as you met this young man, and then, they were with you, they sat down at the table. And I see this as being a threefold ministry. One question we get asked a lot is, what are you going to do with your children living in the city? How are you going to save your children? We get it all the time. And I see this as, actually, maybe you can speak to this, to how this impacts the home.
Mhm. Yeah, well, the importance of the church as a community living together is so important. So you know who you are. A family alone in the city trying to evangelize and be that corporate city is a very difficult proposition. You need others.
Mhm.
You
Amen.
need that boundedness. This is our family. This is who we are. And we identify with this group unapologetically. And your children, of course, need to have those friendships within that group. There's a certain greenhouse thing that needs to happen. And you're naive if you just go into the city thinking that we can live here for the next 10 years by ourselves and do evangelism. Your children will get friends. They need friends, right? So yeah, obviously, first and foremost is, maybe it doesn't need to be said, but I think it should be said. We have to be together as a church, as a community, living these things out, where our main friendships and is. But yes, and then inviting people into our home and evangelism. Again, it takes a lot of wisdom. There's places you don't want your children. There's things you don't want them to hear. But they do see things and experience things that maybe I never did growing up on our 10-acre property, in the back in the countryside. Yesterday they experienced something there and heard a story that, hey, is a teaching moment, great teaching moment. And so, am I answering your question, Sam? Here,
Yeah, yeah.
dig in a little further.
And I appreciate that you bringing out the importance of the church family in this, but the aspect of your children growing up in an environment where they see that the gospel isn't just for us, and that it is applicable to all people in all places at all times.
Yes.
And to be able
Yeah.
to bring people into your home, and they see that mom and dad care about the things that they're doing. They're not just teaching these things because it's a good way to live. They're teaching these things because they do make a difference in society on a societal level. So I think to see this as a threefold ministry, where you are reaching to the lost, and you are edifying the body by having, that familial relationship with the believers over the table, because so much can happen there. But also you have all those little eyes and ears and hearts that are being shaped when you are, because we talked about this right at the beginning of the Q&A, was this is a way of life. And a way of life is communicated to another generation because they grow up in that way of life. And I see it as a very holistic way to show your children who Jesus Christ is and how he ministers to the world around us.
Thank you for sharing that. And I want to just clarify something in my reflection of maybe, growing up on 10-acre property. I don't want to in any way negatively reflect on those who are called to the country and to serve there. Like we need those people as well. And I don't want to reflect negatively on that at all. And actually, even though I grew up on that 10-acre property, my father, who's influenced me greatly, was very evangelistic and very hospitable. And he never quite knew, he would come back with dad when he was gone for a day on the truck, and so this spirit, this heart of hospitality will flow out of any Christian anywhere and make an impact.
Mm-hmm. Amen. Amen. Yeah, I think we've taken liberties with time here this morning. It's a conversation that needs to be ongoing, and I hope that each one of us can explore. There was another thing that I wanted to touch on, living out of abundance, and this for me has been a journey. What does it mean to live out of the abundance of our Heavenly Father instead of thinking about the cost or just having an abundant mindset? And I would say, Brian, that you have influenced me over the years in thinking about abundance. Maybe we'll take the time if you have just a snippet to share on that mindset.
Yeah, sure. So the opposite of abundance is scarcity. And I do believe that the mindset of a scarcity is selfish, is pride, it's of the darkness.
Mhm.
And many people are moving into that mode in our world as what it feels like resources are becoming less. And so you think in terms of a limited amount, like there's only so many, so I need to protect myself. I need to get that bigger account, that nicer house, that higher fence, that alarm system, those cameras. I got to protect myself. And it just goes on. And of course, our world thrives on that, right? Huge market, billions of dollars, you know, on fear. I mean, that's how people get elected. That's how governments work. It's of the evil one. God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. And so we know that with God, with heaven's store, there's unlimited resources, and that should give us a framework to look at the world and those around us and how we live and give and all these things. So it's definitely only by the Spirit of God, and it might, and it's really the life of Jesus. You see
Mhm.
how he lived that out. It's more blessed to give than to receive, Paul
Amen.
says, that Jesus said, even though that's not quoted in the Gospels.
Mhm.
But yeah. Hmm.
I found that that it takes a heart change, a perception of your own salvation, of who God is to you. If you don't see that abundance in your own life, it's hard to live in that abundance in your broader life as well. But we could go on and on and on. Um, God bless you, brother, for sharing this. Thank you for your passion and your care around this topic, and thank you for not only teaching about it but living it out. Those of us who know you know that this is the way you live. So God be with you. Thank you all for joining us again this morning. Thank you for hanging in there. Um, it's a worthy conversation, and I think we should look into our hearts and see where hospitality comes from and where this mindset and way of life come from. And it comes from our Lord and Savior, I believe. Um, would you say a prayer, Bryant, and then I'll make an announcement and close us.
Pray, Father, we thank you that we can bow our heads here before the God of the universe, the God that is above all gods.
Hmm.
And Father, we are your children, and we don't feel worthy of that. We know that you sent your son into the wilderness of this world on this incredible rescue mission to rescue humanity back to yourself and to make it possible for us to have this relationship with you where we can come to you boldly to your throne through Jesus, through your son, and cast our cares on you. Father, I pray, Lord, that as your children, as your partners, as your ambassadors of your nation, that we could be faithful representatives. Give us your power, Lord. Thank you for your mercy, your long suffering, your kindness towards us. Help us to be kind towards others, not condescending, not better than thou, but really be just as Jesus was, the creator here teaching us that that I didn't come to be served, but to serve. May we take up that vision statement, that purpose, and live this out, Lord. Help us to do that in our world when we want to run and hide. So thank you, Lord, for this time. Bless each one who's listened on this call. I know there's many people who are living this out in beautiful ways, and And I pray you'll bless them in a special way. And Father, may your kingdom come and may your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. In Jesus' name, amen.
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 Our next meeting is at 6 a.m. Eastern Time on March 23rd, so 2 weeks from now. And Brother Merle Burkholder will be sharing on God's design for community. And there'll be a part 1 at 6 a.m. and a part 2 at 3 p.m. And that's Eastern Time. March 23rd, God's design for community, a part 1 and part 2. So 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon. And of course, all of our talks are available on whatever platform you listen to your podcasts and also on YouTube. I realize that the majority of the people who listen to this actually listen to the recordings as well. But thank you all for joining us this morning for the conversation. And I pray that God richly blesses you all for making the sacrifice to get up at 6 o'clock Eastern Time, I guess, to join us here. God be with you. Be fruitful and serve the Master in your communities today. Grace and peace.
As iron sharpens iron, so a man sharpens the countenance of his friend.